let's get into Esther now. 10 Hebrew chapters and 6 Greek chapters. This is very confusing, okay, because it was written in Hebrew. There's a Hebrew version of it, but then later there was a Greek addition to it. Greek chapters were added on to it. And the Hebrew version, it doesn't mention God in the Hebrew version. It's so interesting. As an inspired book of the Bible, the Hebrew version of Esther, which is found in Protestant Bibles, BTW, the Greek 6 extra chapters in Greek are only found in a Catholic Bible, which is curious because it's like the Hebrew version doesn't mention God at all, whereas you do hear all this talk of God in the Greek extra chapters that you find in the Catholic Bible. Now, you have in the Greek chapters enrich the text because you have Mordecai, the main character, one of the main characters. His dreams he has at the beginning and at the end, and various prayers and letters that are very pious and very devout. In speaking of God, are found in these 6 Greek chapters. Now, what do you do with these chapters? Well, the Septuagint translation in Greek in the 2nd century BC put it all in chronological order. It kind of mixed the Greek and the Hebrew together and pieced the Greek chapters in where they fit. Jerome, however, St. Jerome in the 4th century AD, he appends the Greek chapters and lumps them at the end. So the Douay-Rheims, probably follows Jerome in that way. My hunch is the Douay-Rheims translation puts them out of chronological order and slaps these 6 extra Greek chapters on at the end. So that can be really confusing to read in that version of the Bible. That translation, the Douay-Rheims, is an older translation. Why are they doing that? Because that's what Jerome decided to do in AD, in the 4th century, St. Jerome. Now we have the RSVCE, the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition that I use. Goes back to the Septuagint practice and puts it all back in chronological order for us. And so in my Bible, the Greek is like italicized. It's in a different font, so you know when you're reading Greek. And you see the chapter numbers. So the chapter numbers are a clear giveaway, okay? When it starts out with chapters 11 and 12, okay, this is weird. That's because these are the first 2 Greek chapters of these 6 extra chapters. Chapter 11 and 12 are the first ones. And they slap them on at the beginning because it has like this dream and all this information kind of blending into the story. So it really fills out and completes the whole story when you have the Greek chapters in chronological order mixed in with these 10 Hebrew chapters. Hope that makes sense. If it could get any more confusing, the New International Bible, instead of using the 11 through 16, they refer to them as A through F. So they use letters instead of numbers for the Greek chapters. But Protestant Bibles leave out the Greek chapters and can consider them apocryphal. But anyway, all right, enough of that. Ahasuerus is the name of the great king in this story, and that is clearly identified here. In history, who this is Xerxes the First. Otherwise known as the Great Xerxes, whose armies drank up the rivers. You hear about this guy in these ancient Greek writings, Herodotus's The Histories and Thucydides' The Peloponnesian Wars. Yes, I plowed through both of those books, and I can't remember anything except the Peloponnesian Wars. They kept talking about hoplites. Hoplites are Greek soldiers, Hoplites running here, doing this, that, and fighting this guy and that guy. I can't hardly remember anything except it was epic battle war that went on, the Peloponnesian Wars. are fascinating. But Xerxes factors in big in these stories because he wanted to conquer Greece, and back to the 300 story, the movie, the 300 and the heroic stand of these 300 Spartans against Xerxes. And it's, and who ordered the Hellespont to be whipped, with chains, and then whoosh, whoosh, he was like, it's awesome stuff here. Because he was mad, because some of his ships got sunk, and he was mad. The river in the Dardanelles Straits there, where they were trying to get his army across, and it wasn't cooperating, so he ordered his men to go down there and whip it and throw chains in. I thought that's great. This guy thought he was a god, and so on. Xerxes, this is cool stuff. So that's the context here, and Esther is the main character of the story, and her uncle Mordecai, these two Jews. Esther, this is kind of like Daniel, during the Persian period, after the Babylonian captivity, some of the Jews remained behind, okay? And the Persians came in, and they were doing fine there. And they did not return to the Holy Land. They stayed there. And some of them were given pagan names. If you remember, Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so in this case, Esther possibly could be given this pagan name after this god Astarte or Asheroth. Okay, and Mordecai could possibly be named after this god Marduk, this Babylonian god from the creation epic that killed this other god and did some stuff. Okay. So anyway, they're assimilating into the culture of this pagan society. So it's kind of interesting, kind of like Tobit. You have these Jews or Israelites living in this foreign land. They're not Jews, actually. They're of the tribe of Benjamin, which is going to be important, as we'll see in the story. That's very important that they are of the tribe of Benjamin. Esther and her uncle Mordecai are Benjaminites. That's going to be important. So then you have this bad guy Haman. And I guess I'll explain why it's important that they're Benjaminites, Esther and Mordecai, because their chief rival and enemy in the story is this guy Haman. And Haman is an Amalekite. Remember, Amalek. And remember who was supposed to wipe, first of all, they resisted Israel on the way into the promised land, okay? And then at a certain point, Samuel orders Saul to go make war upon them and wipe them out and kill their king, and Saul doesn't do it. Why? Because they fall on the spoil of war. And then he brings the king back to his court. And Samuel's like, what's up? Saul, I told you to kill this guy, Agag, the Amalekite. And Samuel whips out his sword and hacks the guy to pieces right there in the, before Saul. Pretty brutal stuff. So he killed Agag and hacked him to pieces. So there's a lot of bad blood between the Amalekites and the Jews, and particularly the tribe of Benjamin, which is where Saul descended from, the tribe of Benjamin. If you remember the first king of Israel, Saul was a Benjaminite. And he's the one that killed, that defeated the Amalekites. So there's bad blood there. And Haman, when he finds out Mordecai is Jewish or is of this tribe of Benjamin, that he's part of the people of Israel, he is like, he can't stand him even more. And he wants to wipe out not just this guy who's dishonoring, disrespecting him, he feels slighted by, but in the story, but he wants to kill all those people. So there's a lot of history here. And this book now, Esther, is never quoted in the New Testament again, just like Judith. Never quoted. And rarely referred to by the church fathers, which is interesting. It's not used on Sundays or feasts in the lectionary. Only Thursday of the first week of Lent uses Esther's prayer. So it's just another sadly neglected book. Well worth reading. The theme of divine providence is huge. And fighting this theme of when people try to fight against this kingdom, this nation that has these righteous laws. And people get mad at them. Why are people always trying to wipe out the Jews? This whole story is about Haman trying to wipe out and annihilate the Jews, the Jewish people from the face of the earth, the Israelites, all of them. Why? Jeez. Seems like it's just a running theme throughout salvation history all the way up to the 20th century and to our current day. I mean, people just pointing missiles at Israel. Why do people hate them so much? An interesting question throughout history. Well, their laws, what they represent, the one true and living God. It's just interesting. It's like the anger that people can have towards the church and towards priests or towards anybody. You ever try to call somebody out on something? A teenager perhaps or whatever, and they just get furious. It's unbelievable, the rage. Who are you to judge me and blah, blah, blah. They just go apoplectic on you. Unbelievable rage and anger when we simply shine the light of truth on something or someone, and people can get so mad when we do that. This could be part of it. Because look, they were given, and look, we all know they didn't live up to the Word of God. I mean, they're not saying we're holier than anybody else necessarily in and of ourselves. We're just like everybody else. But look, we're the chosen people. God revealed himself to us. We came to know God and be known by him, and he gave us his law. We're just doing what we're told. It's not our initiative. He introduced himself to us, informed us as a people from this one guy that he revealed himself to. And now we're stuck with having to uphold this law and shine this light of truth of God and his ways and his laws on the world. And people are mad at us. And now obviously there's all kind of politics and stuff and economics and I don't know. But I think that has to be part of this. On a grand macro scale, the outrage and anger and rage and hatred people feel towards them is because of their role in salvation history. They are the gadfly, It's the same reason people were mad at Socrates, They put him to death. I mean, they just... I think behind it is a guilty conscience. Sometimes behind anger and outrage, you're like, dang, easy. What the heck? I think underneath that sometimes, even outrage and anger at the church is a guilty conscience. And they want to get the high ground and become outraged at something and just... But underneath, if you peel everything away, they're afraid of the voice of truth. So anyway, self-righteous outrage. Now, the righteousness of God's laws and ways are different and strange and appear hostile. There's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. You're trying to kill us with these laws. They're hostile. They're hostile to us. They're afraid of God and his ways. And but are seen in the end of the story to be good and peaceable. So here we see that conflict, that contrast, that confluence of pagan ways and beliefs, and this new strange exiled people living in our midst who have these different laws, abide by different laws. And we're like, we don't understand them. So, but in the end of the story, by the end of the story, the king and the people see that actually these are good laws. These are, and in the end, they're seen as peaceable and good. So that's a little brief introduction, and let's get into the book itself of Esther and rip through it here. Now, so in the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, Mordecai of the tribe of Benjamin had a dream. He has this dream of this dragon and this monster, this like behemoth and this leviathan, okay, that kind of symbolize him and his adversary at war, fighting each other. And then he, in chapter 12 in my Bible, it's really chapter 2, but it's chapter 12. There's these two eunuchs, and Mordecai's in the court, and he hears two eunuchs with this plot to kill the king and overthrow the king. This like coup attempt, and he exposes them and tells the king, Xerxes, that these guys are trying to pull this stunt. And so anyway, he's held in high esteem by the king and honored for exposing this coup attempt. And now moving on. So now the king Xerxes has this great big banquet, first for all his nobles, and then for all the people. And I find this interesting. He has this, for the great and the small, he prepares this banquet for 7 days. And listen to the description of this. I love it. It's like, there was white cotton curtains and blue hangings caught up with cords of fine linen and purple to silver ring. Who's the lady that decorates all the time? That went to jail or something like that? Martha Stewart, man. This is like a Martha Stewart catalog or whatever. Listening to this description of the king's palace and the court, where he has both the great and the small, all the people in there for the 7-day feast. And listen to this. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings caught up with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, and mother of pearl and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king, and drinking was according to the law. No one was compelled. For the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as every man desired. Now, Queen Vashti is summoned by the king to make an appearance. When the king was merry with wine, his queen Vashti is summoned. And she's not going to obey. She's told to come with her royal crown before the king. He wants to show her her beauty to all the guests. Now, some of the ancient rabbis said that he told her to come in just the crown. Okay, I don't know. That, who knows? I think maybe they're just making fun of Xerxes or whatever of the whole thing. But she did not comply. Maybe to her credit, we don't really know why she doesn't comply. Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, and the king was enraged and his anger burned within him. And he's like, look, now I've lost face, and look, all my generals and all their women are going to start rebelling against them, and they're not going to, and this is going to be mayhem here. So look, Vashti is to come no more before King Xerxes. You're excluded from my presence. She leaves the story. She's gone. So he's like, okay, he's starting to feel like a little lonely. So he's like, all right, I'm going to have a little beauty contest. Some of his courtiers are like, hey, why don't you have a beauty contest in the land? And then, pick you a nice young lady to be the queen. So he does. And Esther's part of this beauty contest, Esther, this Benjaminite woman. And she wins the blasted thing. She was a knockout like Judith, absolutely gorgeous, and a beautiful maiden, lovely and beautiful maiden. And she goes to the court now, and she's elevated to the status of queen. And Mordecai says, don't tell anybody that you're of the nation of Israel. Just keep it a secret between us, because they're... And But Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found grace and favor in his sight, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, and he's sitting out there, and Haman the Agagite, remember, king Agag of the Amalekites, who was hacked to pieces by Saul. Haman, I don't know how to say it, Haman the Agagite, walks by, and Mordecai doesn't do him obeisance. And Haman has been elevated to the status of prime minister of the land, basically second in command to King Xerxes. He is the man. Haman. And Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, and he's like furious. And then he finds out this guy's Jewish. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, he was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, so they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, and Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, Xerxes. So basically that means like including the promised land, okay, that was under their domain at that time. So Jews everywhere, assuming from Egypt all the way up, the whole thing, all the way to India, their kingdom extended. All the Jews were going to be wiped out. Now, there's implications for the incarnation, for the launch of the New Testament, of the New Covenant, with the outcome of this whole thing, of this story of Esther. Has huge implications. So everything's hanging in the balance. Haman said to King Xerxes, "There's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from those of every other people, and they don't keep the king's laws, so that it's not for the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And if that's not convincing or compelling enough, I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the royal treasury." So the guy throws some money into the deal too, and it's just really underhanded. And now this, I did not research, but I'm pretty sure, I've been told, but I did not verify this to be the case, but they choose the 13th day to put the Jews to death. For this massive genocide of the Jewish people, to annihilate them. They chose the 13th day of this first month, which is why 13 is like a bad number, okay? An unlucky number, Friday the 13th. So Jason is the bad guy in Friday the 13th, right? Jason? Friday the 13th, where do we get this like fear of the number 13? Probably from Esther. I'm assuming that's where it comes from, okay? The 13th day was in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, to annihilate the Jews. And this is a copy of the letter. Now, and pointed out to us that among all the nations in the world there is scattered a certain hostile people who have laws contrary to those of every other nation, and continually disregard the ordinances of the king, so that the unifying of the kingdom, which we honorably intend, cannot be brought about. We understand that this people, and it alone, stands constantly in opposition to all men, perversely following a strange manner of life and laws, and is ill-disposed to our government, doing all the harm they can so that our kingdom may not attain stability. We see this beyond all the way into the period of the Greeks, after the Persians, and then the Romans. I mean, it's just like this is the claim they're making against the Jews, and then against the Christians. We're going to have to make the same arguments and go through all this stuff. A strange manner of life and laws. They're going to be utterly destroyed by the sword. and may in one day go down in violence to Hades. But the city was perplexed. Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth when this decree is announced of this annihilation of this people. And people start lamenting. There's this widespread mourning, great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes again. Here we go. And the queen, Esther, finds out, and she's deeply distressed. And now some amazing things Mordecai is going to say to her that are providence. The theme of providence runs all through this story. Remembering the days of your lowliness when you were cared for by me, because Haman, who is next to the king, spoke against us for our destruction. Beseech the Lord and speak to the king concerning us and deliver us from death. So Mordecai, the uncle, appeals to Esther, go to the king. She's like, look, I can't go in there. I can't just go in unless I'm called or summoned. I can't just go in on my own initiative. I could get killed for just doing that. So she's terrified, but listen to what he says. If you keep silence at such a time as this, look, who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That there's providence behind all this. That you're put in this position, winning that beauty contest. I mean, what are the odds? And here you are in this position to save us and put a good word in for us to the king and try to do something. Gather all the Jews and hold a fast on my behalf. So yeah, this is in the Hebrew version here, where there's no mention of God. But there is a mention of fasting. So it's like God is implied. Obviously, they're going to hold a fast, and they're in sackcloth and ashes. Why are they doing these things? They're obviously religious, devotional, pious things to do. So there's an implied reference to God here, even if he's not mentioned by name in the Hebrew version. So she implores everybody to fast on her behalf. And neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night and day, and I and my maids will also fast as you do, and I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Then Mordecai prays to the Lord, and it's this powerful prayer. Please, Lord, turn our mourning into feasting. Turn our mourning into feasting. Some really rich themes here that could be tied into salvation history in so many ways. I did this that I might not set the glory of man above the glory of God. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I didn't bow down to Haman and I started this whole thing. Mordecai's praying to God. Look, I just did it because I was worried, concerned for your glory and honor. And I wasn't going to give obeisance to this knucklehead, Haman. The Agagite. I just wasn't going to do it. So do not destroy the mouth of those who praise thee. Boy, that's something in the Psalms, that comes up again repeatedly. It's like an argument used against God in the Psalms of lament. Like, look, God, who's going to praise you from Hades, from Sheol? If we all die, there's not going to be anybody left to give you praise. Like, you need us. Anyway, it's kind of like, what do you call it when you're trying to get something from somebody? Blackmail. It's like holy blackmail, you need us to praise you, so don't kill us. He's kind of doing the same thing here. Turn our mourning into feasting. And all Israel cried out mightily, for their death was before their eyes. What is it about death? It's like a cold bucket of water in the face. It just wakes us up out of our slumber. Deathly anxiety. Esther is just gripped with deathly anxiety, and all the people. Death was before their eyes. That's why we should think about our death a lot. Daily, we should remind ourselves of death. It just resets everything. We get spinning off in different directions into vanity and folly. And death is like hitting the reset button. If we had a little reset button on the side of our head, and we could just boop, push that thing in, and just resets everything. Where am I? What am I? What's the meaning of life? Meaning, purpose, destiny. Where did I come from? Where am I going? What am I supposed to be doing in the meantime? The death just like bucket of cold water in the face wakes us up. Life is short. Time is fleeting. And, all right, what's important? It just resets everything. That's why, from a Christian perspective, with a Christian understanding of death, it's absolutely vital to living a truly wise and ordered life. Death was before their eyes, so they're mourning and crying. Now, Esther has this great prayer. "O Lord, do not surrender thy scepter to what has no being. Save me from my fear." I like how it ends. Save me from my fear. God, I believe, like the guy that, when he came down from the Mount of Transfiguration, our Lord found the apostles they couldn't heal, cast a demon out of this guy. And they're, sitting around like frustrated. And then our Lord walks up and he says, you guys have no faith. That's the problem. And they're like, "I believe, help my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief." If you can cast this demon out, the guy says to our Lord, and he's like, if I can cast him out, look, where's your faith, man? And the guy cries out to him, "I believe, help my unbelief." I just like this. Save me from my fear. She's just totally honest about her fear. She's in the grip of this fear. Now, on the third day, when she ended her prayer, she took off the garments in which she had worshipped and arrayed herself in splendid attire, then majestically adorned, after invoking the aid of the all-seeing God and Savior. She went with her 2 maids, and she goes into the king's presence. Her heart was frozen with fear. She walks into the king's throne room, and she promptly faints. The queen faltered and turned pale and faint and collapsed on her maid. But God changed the spirit of the king, because at first he was like, the audacity of this woman to come into my presence. She is the queen and his wife. Wow. This doesn't sound like a very healthy marriage. Really dysfunctional, disordered marriage here. She comes into his presence, faints. But God changed the spirit of the king to gentleness. And in alarm, he sprang from his throne and took her in his arms until she came to herself, and he comforted her with soothing words and said, "What is it, Esther? I am your brother. Take courage. You shall not die, for our law applies only to the people. Come near and speak to me." And then she says, look, she's still not ready to make her request and to appeal for the Jews. So she says, here's my request. Why don't you dine with me and bring Haman tomorrow night? And I'm going to prepare a nice banquet for you. So the next night they show up for the banquet, and the king's like, what's your request? What do you want? And she's like, here's my request. Why don't you come to a nice banquet tomorrow night for me, you and Haman, that I'm going to have for you? And she does this a couple times. Is she procrastinating? I don't know. But basically the second night now at this feast with Haman present there, this is great. So before the feast now, Haman is like, look, I'm going to get that guy Mordecai. I'm going to get him. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build me a gallows. I'm going to hang that guy on. 75 feet high. This gallows, I'm going to hang Haman from these gallows. But here's what's amazing now in divine choreography or divine providence. The king that night, the night before, he's going to go have this banquet with Queen Esther, and she's finally going to make her petition known to the king with Haman present there. the king can't sleep. And so the king could not sleep, providentially. And he gave orders to bring the books of memorable deeds. So whatever, some court records, and to be brought to him, I guess, to put him to sleep because it's boring, drudgerous stuff. So anyway, they bring this chronicles of this stuff to him, and he's like reading all these official decrees about stuff. And then in there, he just happens to be read the story of Mordecai disclosing to him way back at the beginning of this whole thing, the coup attempt on his life, the overthrow by these two eunuchs. And Mordecai was the one that revealed that to him and saved his life. And he was never properly rewarded. So now look at all this incredible irony in chapter 6. Haman comes in to the king, and King Xerxes is like, look, there's a guy that I forgot to honor. What shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? This is so fun. That's what he's telling Haman. He's not identifying who he wants to honor. He just poses this question, what should I do to honor somebody that that I really delight to honor? This is going to give me great delight to honor some individual. And here's Haman thinking, it's him. He's like, ooh, I'm going to be honored. So he says, well, why don't you... he's thinking to himself. Haman said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? So it's an incredible reversal here. The king wants to honor Mordecai for saving his life. And Haman answers, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And gets this long description of all this honor and glory to reward this individual that he thinks is himself. And the king says, devastatingly to him, do so to Mordecai the Jew. This is great story. This is great story, great drama. He's already built the gallows. Now the guy just got promoted over his head. Haman hurried to his house mourning with his head covered, and then he actually, he's like, goes and he's pleading for his life, and he actually, now it's disclosed to the king, King Xerxes, what Haman was really up to. Finally comes to the king's attention. What's been going down with Haman and Mordecai. and he realized this guy is false to the core. Esther makes known to him, let my life be given at my petition and my people at my request, for we are sold, and I and my people to be destroyed, to be slain, to be annihilated. A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. So she calls out, finally, Haman. Not only has he been demoted, and his enemy Mordecai supplants him as second in command, but now he's been called out, this whole plot, by the queen. And King Xerxes is like, man, what's up? He's furious, and he leaves. And Haman's left there with Esther. And he falls on her couch. Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was because he's pleading with her for mercy. And then the king walks in and finds him laying on the couch with his wife, the queen. And he says, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? And he orders his execution, and he's executed on the very gallows that he had made 75 feet high, that he had prepared for Mordecai. He gets hung on those same gallows. All right. Now, just to kind of summarize, the king can't reverse, King Xerxes can't reverse his decision about the Jews, but what he does do is say, look, the Jews can defend themselves. And basically, no one does anything because they're terrified of the king. And then they have this new perspective on the Jews and this Their hearts have changed, the people. We find that the Jews who were consigned to an annihilation by this thrice accursed man are not evildoers, but are governed by most righteous laws, and are sons of the Most High, the most mighty living God, who has directed the kingdom both for us and for our fathers in the most excellent order. So there's this whole change of heart that happens now in the kingdom for the king and the people. And no one could make a stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all the people. So then the Jews go on a rampage and kill a whole bunch of their enemies anyway. Then 3 times in chapter 9, they refuse to lay hands on the plunder. Even though they've won this great victory, they won't lay hands on the plunder. Harkens back to Saul. And they were supposed to annihilate the Amalekites. And King Agag put him to death, but instead they fall on the spoil. Well, here in chapter 9, it's very interesting that they laid no hand on the plunder. They laid no hands on the plunder. They laid no hands on the plunder. 3 times. And this day of feasting, so after all that mourning and grieving, the story begins with just despair and tremendous fear, death anxiety, deathly anxiety. I mean, just people on the verge of annihilation because of Haman the Agagite had cast Pur, that is lot. The word Pur means lot, to crush and destroy them. Therefore they call these days of feasting Purim, after the term Pur, the day of lots, the feast of lots, for 2 days. So the 13th was when this was supposed to happen, and now the 14th and 15th day of that month is going to be these days of feasting, these 2 days of feasting, of gladness and feasting, the 14th and the 15th day. So these things have come from God. This tiny spring became a river. The tiny spring is really Esther. And there was light in the sun and abundant water. The river is Esther. So now Mordecai ends with this dream he has. And it's just a great story of divine providence and heroism. But humanity, it's just an incredibly beautiful story. Sad that it's so neglected. So I highly encourage you to read it and enjoy it.